Welcome to Feedback Fatigue. I'm Jake Hughes.
And I'm Katie Ritter.
So, Katie, I've been listening to Smartless. The
Oh,
the
I love
the
Smartless.
premise for this whole banter, we call it the banter period at the beginning of each show, comes from Smartless because Katie listened to the show and likes it. And they were joking about calling their podcast Seshies. So, welcome to today's Seshi, Katie.
Seshi.
Welcome to the pod.
Wow.
Welcome to
Okay.
today's Seshi.
Welcome to the Seshi. I do love those three. What episodes have you been listening to?
Matthew McConaughey, Andy Samberg, just random ones. I don't know.
Nice. Nice.
They've got a
They're
good
pretty funny.
chemistry.
Good chemistry. They're all different. I don't know if this has been brought up on the podcast or on what you've listened to, but Sean Hayes was in like a one-man Broadway show, and apparently it was just unbelievable. And now I'm like, well, I must go to Broadway. I mean, it's done now, so I missed my chance, but apparently he was fantastic. Won a
I don't know
Tony.
how to process that one man show being fantastic, but more power to him. That isn't us.
Yeah, no, it's not. We need each other. we can't.
We do need each other. Neither one of us could hold
We
this
can't be doing this
podcast on our
alone.
own. No doubt. Oh, man. That'd be awful. What fun would that be?
No. No one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear that. So, what are you doing this weekend? Tell everyone.
Thanks for
Tell them
setting
what
me
you're
up,
doing.
Katie. I'm running a half marathon.
Wow.
So I'm running the Trap Marathon half, whatever. It's a place in Vermont here by Stowe. It's the lodge, the cast from The Sound of Music, or that movie is
The
based on a
famous Von Trapp.
family, the Von Trapp family, which moved. That family moved to Vermont a long time ago.
Truly our claim to fame.
Mm-hmm.
The Von
So
Trapps.
now we have the Von Trapp Beer Hall, which is the remnants of that family's heritage.
Their mark on the world. And so this is going to be mountainous. Like, are you hilly? I'm assuming you're running through Stowe.
So I'm going with my buddy. He was going to run the Charlotte Marathon and decided not to do that. And I feel like this is his consolation prize. And he asked me to do it with him. So I said yes. It's going to be in the woods around this area in Vermont, up some hills, down some hills.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing how it goes. Do you have a time in mind that you're trying to crush?
I didn't really prepare for this. Like, I run a lot. I'm not going at this cold, but
Oh, you run a
I
lot?
do run
Okay.
a lot. Okay. I can say that. It's fine. But I have not been
I'm proud
training
of
for a
you. No,
half
you do run a lot. It's
marathon
great.
in a disciplined, particular way. So we'll see how it goes. But I just need to beat Pete. I just need to be my friend.
You're one of those people who, like, I haven't trained and then you're going to go crush it. I feel like you just do it. You're one of those kids, didn't study for the test, but I'm going to get an A.
No, I'm definitely not one of
That's you in
those
running.
people
You're
for the
just,
tests. I always studied a lot for tests. My wife makes fun of me for. I always spent a lot more time in the library. She'd get her work done in half the time and be like, "Can we hang out? What do we like? Stop! Why aren't you done yet?"
you're still working.
With running, with athletics, I have been training a lot, so this isn't
Yeah,
cold,
you get up and crank
and I am going to try.
like 20 miles.
I am going to
Yeah.
try, but the course sounds pretty hard, so I think it's going to hurt. I think it's going to hurt some.
Well, good luck. We're all thinking of you here at Feedback Fatigue Inc.
So we'll see if this is the last episode that I ever record.
so, so this could be it.
This might
Well, no.
be it.
No, it's not. You're going to be great. We're going to talk about your time, break down the race on the next
We'll
episode.
break down the race.
Actually, this couldn't have been a better segue into our guest today.
Mm-hmm.
Running.
Mm-hmm.
Janet's a runner.
Yeah, she is.
She is a runner. Okay, yeah, that's right.
Our guest today on Feedback Fatigue is Janet Rosseth. the founder and CMO of Cadence Marketing Solutions, which is an agency in the multifamily space that she founded in 2017. So that's 7 years ago, after 20 years as a director of marketing at various portfolios. And she's a wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience within the industry. So we're excited to have her on the show and get her take.
Yeah, very excited for this episode. And in her consulting, she uses running language, cadence, pacing in the deliverables to her clients. And it's a nice visual, it's a nice concept and metaphor into what she dives into. And she's delivering feedback all the time as a consultant in going through these tests and stress testing the renter journey for her clients. And so interesting to hear just her approach on how to deliver feedback and in a way that people are ready to hear it.
Her take on balancing technology with human interaction is something that I think is very useful and we relate to here at Widewell. We prefer the hybrid model. Tech for some, people for some. It's not an all or nothing thing. I think you need tech for efficiency and people for the right level of quality when you're dealing with residents. So she gets into that in more detail, and that's something that we stand by and believe in. And then also training in how to create these systems. And multifamily it's very technical to roll something out. There's lots of layers, there's lots of different constituents involved in executing on any new technology, any project. So she starts to get into her experience with that as well, provide some insight.
Very excited. Dive in.
As always, find Feedback Fatigue on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Sometimes we've been having some upload troubles, but we'll get it there as much as we can. You can find it on widewell.com/feedback-fatigue. Season 1, Episode 5, Janet Rosseth. So our first podcast episode ever with Josh from Pink Taco, I was delayed the whole time. And so I would talk and then they'd just stand there not responding. And I was like, okay, I get it. Like, maybe I'm not the most interesting, but just a little love might help. And then 5 seconds later, they'd snap in and respond to the question. So it was shockingly hard to hold a conversation with the delay.
I bet.
Have you ever had
technology
similar issues with your podcast? How's the podcast going, by the way?
It's going pretty good. I have little issues here and there that I have no idea how to troubleshoot in the moment. Because you trust the system and the platform that you're on and things happen. I have one podcast that we released and it got promoted in the first 10 minutes of my guest's voice did not come through at all. And then 10 minutes, 19 seconds into the show, she's totally there and on the rest. So we're having to go back and re-record that 10 minutes because we cannot figure out how to get the sound to come in. But yeah, that's been the most probably troublesome piece of the podcasting is not knowing how to troubleshoot when something goes wrong.
It's awful. In my previous life before Widewell, I was a video producer at Car Gurus.
Oh, that's handy. That's very handy.
I have a little experience with what the challenges of something like this would be. And there's just so many opportunities for error. And little things become huge problems. And especially in video, it's like, did a car drive through the window in the background in the middle of your best take? And now that's looks bad and it's ruined. And it's hard. It's undoubtedly hard. So I commend you for taking it on. How many episodes are you in your series?
13.
13 down.
Nice.
Yeah.
What have you learned? What's been the major takeaways of the experience thus far?
Oh, I think I've learned how to be natural. That took a hot minute. The first couple, I'm very stiff and it was a little harder. I've gotten over myself now. I've also learned that it's okay to be human and be natural and have a couple moments where you have to regroup your wording and trip over somebody's name. I think I have a lot more to learn. I think that's what I've learned.
Do you like listening to yourself? Do you watch episodes back and listen back to just be like,
Yes. I
talking
do.
about feedback, but you do? Okay.
I do. I listen to every one of them back again because it feels like I'm so in the moment of getting us to the next question that I feel like I don't always get the pleasure of hearing the full answer that the guest gave without listening in terms of what am I asking next. So I do like listening back, and I always come at it from a standpoint of really hoping that it was a really great experience and great capture of the guest. That's always my hope. So I think every time I listen to one, it helps me bring out the guest a little bit better in the next one.
That's a really good point of script. Like, you're worried about what's coming next versus listening to be able to respond to the answer and react in the moment a little bit. And it's a muscle to practice
Definitely.
over and over again, that's a great point.
I commend you for listening,
good lesson
taking that
learned.
time listening them back. We should do that, Katie.
Yes, we should probably do film study, just run it back.
I've started to get used to my
I don't know why you
voice.
said that.
I've started to get used to my voice. I'm getting over myself. For a long time,
that takes
I just avoided it. I wouldn't listen back to it, or I wouldn't watch myself.
If you can think about it in terms of appreciating what you have to say rather than the sound of your voice, it helps.
Okay.
This is
I'm not going to say that I don't listen back and say, oh, why did I ask it that way? Why didn't I say this? That could have sounded so much more intelligent.
I will appreciate myself.
This is a good podcast host therapy session. Janet's our guiding light here. We're just going to talk about how
I'm right in the trenches with you. I need the therapy session too.
Oh, we're newbies. This is episode 5, or I don't know what episode this will be, but this is the 5th one that we've done. We'll probably play around with the order a little bit. So we're brand new. I don't know how to start these things, so we're diving right in. We're doing it. But it always feels more comfortable. Why don't you start us off with your career on the operator side? Give us a little history, how you got where you are today.
Sure. So I started, like a lot of people do in this industry, purely by accident as a leasing agent while in college. And 20 years later, I had a long career in leading marketing departments, overseeing both the marketing and leasing divisions of the organizations I worked for. And at the 20-year mark, I stepped out to start my consulting agency, which is Cadence Marketing Solutions. And 7 years into that now, we are part consultancy and part, I'll call it, support system community for those who influence multifamily marketing.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. You've run the gamut of roles in the multifamily world, and I'm sure you've had your experience with feedback from many different angles. I'm curious, just in general, what your relationship with feedback is.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. From the marketing role especially, your customers are everybody in the organization. It's property managers and leasing teams and regional managers and other department heads and executive team and ownership. Your customers are really everybody. So the feedback comes at you in rapid pace. Everybody has something urgent, and it's on you to separate the feedback into priorities. But then it's also often on the marketing team to listen to the feedback from residents, from ownership, from regional teams, and across the marketing entities, whether it's your vendor relationships, but it's digesting and breaking it out into what's actionable and what really needs your attention to use as guardrails for business goals.
How has the feedback evolved in the last 20 years? The collection of it, the interpretation of it, how it's acted upon. What are the differences now versus some of your previous roles?
So different. I think about 20 years ago, we didn't have all this feedback. We just set out in our day to achieve the goals that were set forth for us. And we didn't do it in terms of wondering who's going to write a review about us. The three of us got on a call before we started recording and actually talked about this whole feedback fatigue. And it made me really stop and think, gosh, we have it coming from every direction. Now we do business in terms of what our strategic goals are, but also what's the feedback being posted online about us externally and internally. We've got surveys to capture internal sentiment across our employees and our business partners. And then we've got external feedback in terms of ratings and reviews and conversations on Reddit. You really have to go looking for all the feedback to make sure that your audience is aligned with the direction you chose to go with your business. But you think beyond that, and just personally too, we have feedback coming at us from the watch we wear, the phone in our pocket. You cannot wake up and go through your day without hearing whether or not you're performing at optimal performance,
Do you
right?
have a Garmin too?
On every end.
Runner?
I don't actually. I have completely reason. Well, I do use the Nike running app. So yeah, I measure my performance there too. But I have resisted the Apple Watch because I watch how intently my husband watches whether or not those little circles I'll fill, and it drives me crazy. Like, I don't need one more place to tell me where I'm failing. Got it. I know that.
My watch ends each day telling me if I had an active day or not. It gives me directions.
I would be happy with just that. It was pretty active. Okay, good. I know that, but I don't need to know exactly where I failed. I'm perfectly aware of when I have not gotten enough sleep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it does feel like it's evolved a lot, and we've really become a society that we, as consumers, we choose businesses based on other people's feedback. We rely on that data to make a choice, and as operators, we rely on that data to identify whether or not we are on the right track delivering our business vision. So it's become a huge part of how we operate day to day, both as a consumer and as an employee.
How, on that vein of an Apple Watch, like as I wear mine and mine's buzzing at me to telling me to stand up, I do feel like, to your point, there's just moments throughout the day where you're like, I don't want to know. I don't care about my heart rate. I don't want to know. I know I'm stressed. Yep. I'm trying to get through the moment. I don't need you to tell me.
Yes.
How, with that in mind, and in your role now as a consultant, you're giving a lot of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, and some strategies that you find are effective in delivering that feedback in a way where it's being heard and received well, versus, we'll go the extreme of your Apple Watch yelling at you in opportune moments?
Yes. I think one of the blessings of being a consultant is that generally your clients come to you for feedback. They come with the intent of hearing the hard stuff on occasion, but I tend to really enjoy the compliment sandwich. I like to make sure that clients know that I see where they're doing really well and I see where there's opportunities for improvement. And I end it with, you've got some great people aligned to do some great things. So that's usually where I start. I also always assume the best intentions. Everybody's got areas that they can improve upon or optimize a little bit, but I always assume the best intentions. And when we're starting to define where there's breakdowns in the process, I lean first into, maybe we need to look into the process or into the technology and see where there are opportunities to smooth things out before I assume it's a human issue. So I think that helps to try to relate to the human beings on the other side of that feedback and saying, I get it. Like, sometimes we're doing the best with what we've got and we don't even realize there's a breakdown happening. So let's start there. Let's start with the process and see what's happening.
Have you heard of the concept of the peak end rule? It's a behavioral science concept.
Do tell.
This is sort of another version of the sandwich metaphor, but the peak end rule states that people remember two things. They remember the peak moment of an interaction, and then they remember the end. So ending on a positive note leaves a positive impression. So even if most of your feedback was negative, ending on something positive will tend to leave a lasting, at least medium impression. IKEA does this with their, how they put a cafe at the end of the experience. You go and you get the bill pops up for $700 and you're like, I bought a bookshelf. How did this happen? I came here to get a couple plants. But then you go and get a latte and a couple meatballs and you're like, Okay,
And you
okay,
feel
move
so
ahead.
much
I'm going
better.
to go set this up.
It's so worth it.
So I think we follow that, or my boss professes that strategy as well when he's giving.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I care about how I leave people feeling. People are going to remember how you made them feel more than they might remember what you said. But I care very much about how I make people feel. And I don't ever want to make people feel like a failure or like the process that they've built or that they've been working so hard on has failed. I'd much rather come at it from a standpoint of, sure, there's areas of opportunity and room for improvement, and we can get there together.
Do you typically
Yeah.
give,
And I think
sorry, Katie, do you typically give direct advice to your clients on how they take action on your input? Is that part of the process?
Yep. Yep, we generally do. We have a series of diagnostics that we run to just help really factually identify where there's breakdown. And then it's easy to give recommendations based on that too. And sometimes the recommendations are light until we dig further, and then we get a little more into the nitty gritty details of it. But we try to take people in bite size pieces of feedback, if you will, just so that it's not completely overwhelming.
And I think your point about assuming good intent or assuming intent is all aligned, because intent, if you start talking about someone's intent, it does feel a little personal. And so it's less about, hey, I know what you're trying to do. I know what we're all trying to do. The impact of this process or the impact of this intent versus impact idea of this is what I'm seeing. And let's all row in the same direction here. And then the process just needs to be tweaked a little bit here. I feel like it depersonalizes it just a little bit. So you're not like, oh, it's Janet. Janet's back telling me that.
Yeah.
Now we gotta fix this. It's good to get aligned on that intent piece for sure.
Yeah.
Curious about this concept of the discrepancy between what an operative feels is going wrong and what's actually going wrong. And what are some examples in your experience where someone calls you in and they feel like they have an issue, but they can't quite define it? What typically does the issue end up being?
Yeah. That's a common case. So we work with a lot of owners, operators who are, say, under 10,000 units. They don't have a large marketing team. They might not even have anybody assigned to marketing specifically. But in a lot of cases, we are working with companies who have definitely made note that they've fallen behind in marketing practices and technology, and they just don't know where to begin to level up. So we tend to come in, and the last thing I want to do is come in and say, oh my gosh, yes, like, have you seen your website? Or you're really actually doing business this way. I try to come in from a standpoint of, we call it our roadmap. And we've built a questionnaire around it. So instead of me coming in and pointing out where things are behind or need some readjusting, we go through a series of line items, kind of an audit, if you will, on all the potential areas that marketing hits in an organization. And we rank things based on, we feel pretty strong here. We feel like there's definitely room for opportunity, or we're not even making eye contact on this right now. And that way we do it as a group, and it doesn't feel like I'm coming in and pointing out where they're behind. It feels like they're very involved in the process of identifying where things are behind and where things are working decent. And then from there, we actually can use that process to prioritize, okay, of all these items that we talked about and ranked, which ones feel like the biggest priority to you right now? And sometimes that falls into place just off of the technology that needs to be introduced. For example, if it's a matter of their property management software is just not capable of what they want to achieve anymore, then that's a starting point. That's a hard line in the sand on priorities. You got to start there, and then you can build off of that. But I find it really helps when you can take the group of stakeholders through a simple audit to self-assess where they feel like they're strong and weak and where there's room for improvement, because then it's not just me coming in and poking holes in the process. And then from there, they've got a really good list of, here's how you can bite these things off one by one. And we look at things like, are your stakeholders in the process? So your employees, do you feel like your employees are ready for this level of change? If they are, what kind of pace do you think you can take on over the course of the next few quarters? And how urgent is it that you fix some of these things by spring leasing season or before we roll into the next budget season? So we try to set appropriate pacing strategies rather than try to overhaul everything at once, because you can't turn a ship overnight. You really have to set your course, steer in that direction, and then align the crew, and you're going to hit your target then.
Are you finding that when you ask them their priorities and you have your different clients, are there 2 or 3 that are consistent that come up no matter the organization, or is it pretty different depending on the organization? Are there, I guess, is there a variety, or are you seeing a lot of the same type of priorities?
Oh, that's a really good question. It is always a little bit company specific. Everybody's got their thing that they're strong at. For some, it actually is really the fact that they have human beings doing the leasing and human beings running the properties.
Mm-hmm.
And so the weekend or the opportunity becomes utilizing some of that technology in a way that identifies where there's breakdown without taking away the humanity that they've been driving their business with, because they've got a lot of employees who really care about that personal touch point between a prospect and a resident. And when you all of a sudden come in and say, oh, we're going to roll out AI, it's like, that's not how we've been doing business all that time. So for a lot of them, it's really trying to define what is the right solution to keep that level of humanity that you want engaged, if that's what you continue to want, or to lift some of that administrative work off of people. I think everybody's feeling behind on AI. Everybody's feeling behind on how they can automate processes. But I think there's also a point in the industry right now where for some people that have been behind, they're almost starting to wonder, were we maybe the winners all along, that we haven't overloaded our tech stack and so now we don't have to break it to fix it? Now we can kind of come at it from a clean approach where everybody else has tested the waters.
Mm-hmm. It's the Apple approach. Be second and be better.
Yeah.
What's it?
Yeah, I do think there's definitely there's a commonality behind utilizing feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the three of us have had this conversation too, that there's collecting feedback, but then there's utilizing feedback. And I think everybody's been getting much better at collecting feedback and having some sort of a system or platform in place to allow for feedback across the organization for employees and also for customers. But identifying how you're going to use that feedback going forward, I think, is a little blind spot for some people.
Where do you typically recommend operators start?
The beginning. I think there are a lot of good platforms that help you identify where's the best area to start. Are biggest opportunities lying within maintenance, or are they lying within leasing, or are they lying within communication out of the office? You can generally rank where your biggest opportunity is and start there. But I would say one of the biggest places to start is just training and making sure that everyone who is potentially captured in feedback is aware of what's coming back in. I think too often the feedback comes into a centralized location and those maintenance teams maybe aren't aware of the great things that are being said about them. Or the leasing teams aren't aware of how often prospects go out and actually post a review. We don't expect that to happen until we turn it on and all of a sudden prospects actually really care to give you that feedback. So I think training is a good starting point on what the expectations are, what the feedback is that's coming in, and how to start your day with the intent of collecting more 5 stars.
Now that we have all of these different streams of feedback and all of these places where you can get it, do you feel like you also have to coach through alternative KPIs? 20 years ago, it's like, is the building leased? Good to go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, our 97% occupied, sweet, we're doing our jobs. How do you feel like that's changed? Because now we have, I think, utilizing that feedback, and then how do we measure it? Do you find that you're coaching through, like, well, this could be an alternative KPI. We could actually be measuring what people are saying around maintenance wait times or what, things like that. Like, how does that filter through in your consultative approach and alternative KPIs to consider?
Yes, definitely. I think response time is high up on that priority list. And it's gotten so easy now. You look 10, 20 years ago, residents called the office and left a voicemail with their work order need, and they didn't necessarily have a clock ticking on when that message was received and who picked it up and ran with it. And now we live in a society where you order a Domino's pizza online. Have you guys done
Oh,
this?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
And you can
The
see who
tracker.
has picked up the order, who is making your pizza, who put it in the oven, who's taken the box and is driving it to your house, and literally where they are in your neighborhood. So we've started to develop these expectations that we can see from start to finish the second we put a work order in. Shouldn't we be able to see exactly who's picked up the work order? Have they gone to the maintenance shop, and are they on their way to my house right now? So response times are a really big deal, and there are ways to improve at least the fact that you are responding, even if it's not the actual human being that's doing the work yet. Those are a really low hanging fruit starting point, I think, on just getting the messaging out that makes somebody feel like, yep, we got your work order. We indeed are processing it. We'll be in touch as soon as we're able to get in. And just those automated responses help a ton. But same thing on leasing. And we see it a lot that prospects are writing reviews and submitting reviews if they feel like they are having a hard time getting a hold of the office, or they're, not getting a response back, or they had a fantastic experience and were able to get in for a tour same day. People really like to talk about response times, good or bad.
I'm fascinated by this idea of maturity of a technology, maturity of a service within a certain industry, and how that varies between industries. And the luxury of your role is that you get exposure to a bunch of different operating groups and their technology stacks. Which technologies do operators tend to be quite advanced on right now? And then in what areas do they seem to be falling behind or progressing less quickly compared to others?
Oh, I'm probably not going to answer that question exactly the way you want me to, but I think that it really is a matter of those who lean into the technology that they have and learn how to utilize it in the smoothest possible way. I think one of the things that we come across on a pretty regular basis in some of the diagnostic audits that we do for clients before we get into the actual work is there are just a lot of breakdowns. There are a lot of breakdowns in the connections across prop tech and in the human handoff. And it really comes down to whether or not an organization has embraced fully the technology that they've loaded and passed across the property management teams, and how often they're auditing their own systems to make sure that everything is clicking along smooth and as they expect it to process. It's amazing how much breakdown there is that nobody knows about.
Yeah, we see this.
That really gets in the way of the prospect's experience or the resident's experience. And that's the little stuff that causes big feelings. And it can be fixed, it can be smoothed. You just have to leave enough time and wherewithal to test your own processes here and there and make sure that the experience is measured, not just the reporting that comes out of that tool.
Buy-in is key. This is not the same thing, but we see this at our company. I have purchased and implemented enough tools that never got used that I do extra research and diligence now to really dig in. Is this going to be worthwhile? Because otherwise it reflects poorly on my reputation as an individual at the company if I keep wasting the money. So it does reflect back on the marketers if these things don't go right.
Absolutely.
I think change is, and people will default to familiarity in any situation that gets stressful, or like Jake, I'm just thinking of some of the tools, like when I'm stressed or I need to prospect, like I'm going to revert back to what I typically do.
Mm-hmm.
And I might forget, I have this new tool that I could use to potentially, like, my brain doesn't necessarily go to that right away. And I think actually similarly, it's just you want to have comfort and familiarity when you're in a high pressure situation or when you need to fill the building, it's a lease up, or there's these situations. So it's it does take time, and it takes that
Yeah.
muscle memory to be like, in a situation, this should be a no-brainer to be able to effectively use this tool. And it's something that's really hard to do.
I agree. And I think also it can be challenging to blend human nature with use of tech
Mm-hmm.
in the process. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a hurdle to get through, that you're trying to be a human being in the situation, talking to another human being. And here you've got this tech that you need to move along with you at the same time. So I think there is probably a lot more that we could be doing with training on just utilizing tech in the human experience and really practicing how it looks, how it feels, rather than just showcasing, here are the buttons you push on the screen, here's the reporting that comes back out, and here's what it's going to do in the long end for your business model. We really have to train to the experience along the way from both the employee end and the customer end.
And it needs to be adopted to a certain degree, the training happening in a low
Yeah.
stress situation. To your point, Katie, if you're on a deadline, just get the job done how you always got it done, and it will be faster than learning something new in the moment, even if it will speed up a component of the process.
Yeah. And if you think about what you're doing in a day, if this tech if I have 50 tasks and this tech is only helping me with one, and I'm spending 49 of them using these two tools, it's like, well, maybe we optimize those 49 so this one is like, we don't need a piece of tech to solve for this one thing that you're spending 10 minutes a day on.
Yeah.
And so it's understanding kind of what they're using day to day and trying to maybe perhaps figure out how to best tie into that workflow and that instinct.
That fatigue right there is really a challenge in the industry right now. I think there have been numerous studies put out that identify the average number of tech products and logins that organizations are using in our industry, and it's above 20. And when you think about that, there's redundancy in all those areas. There's holes that aren't being plugged, and there's redundancy across others. And you think about a property manager's day and all the areas in tech they need to touch to just get the job done in a day. And for sure, there are going to be spots within all of that tech that are underperforming and feeling at the end of the day like, oh, you didn't fill out that circle. You're not 100% on this dashboard. I mean, it's challenging. Every single package notification went out to every single resident, and every payable got approved in the system, and every prospect got handled through the CRM. There are a lot of systems to manage.
I've heard this concept that it's come up a few times in my world. I don't know what you would call it, my reading. And it's this 3 different types of organizations. You have very data forward organizations, hybrids, and then sort of like, I guess, people forward or somewhat less tech heavy organizations. I think this applies to operators as it could apply to vendors as a general concept. I'm curious your take. In today's moment, who's winning? Are the tech forward organizations leading? Are those second companies that are coming along learning from the tech forward organizations pulling ahead? What's your take of that right now?
Oh, I think a lot of people are in the hybrid mode right now. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how to blend the tech with the human side of the business. But at the end of the day, our business is very focused on human beings. And probably one of the most emotional purchases of human beings, where they live, where they call home, where their belongings, their pets, their children, their loved ones, their neighbors, their friends come and stay with them. It is a very human centric industry. So turning it to total tech is really challenging. And I'd be curious to see who's doing that really well. I think there's a lot of companies that are trying to find their way through the hybrid model. And it takes a lot of smoothing out to do that.
Do you think hybrid's the winning strategy?
I think it's different for every organization. I think there are some that are going to win the day with
That's why you gotta
the
call
old
Janet.
school
Very
human approach.
answer.
You gotta call Janet to
Sometimes
figure it
I
out.
I gotta tell you, like the stride audits that we do, where we measure the prospect experience from start to finish, there are some cases where I come back and I'm like, the human being who is actually answering the phone and physically present on property is gonna win this day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Because sometimes we circle ourselves in so many directions trying to plug in all the tech. And I have a saying that we fall into the launch and leave it syndrome way too often, that we get excited about a tool that's going to solve all our problems. We launch it, we leave it, we run on to the next one, and we never get to the point of maximizing the usage of that product. And that's where all this friction comes in. So I think the winning model is going to be the one that gets the most attention to make sure that it is operating at maximum capacity.
I think the hybrid's the winning model. If I'm gonna be,
You heard it here first.
What do you think the winning model is going to
I
be?
think it's hybrid. That's what we follow here at Wide Whale. When you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with customers, residents, whatever, maybe we'll get there, but right now you can't automate everything, and it's more about clearing the runway for your people is how I think about it. Anything that can be efficiently automated, systematized, solved by technology removes distractions from the individual that's dealing with customers and enables them to do their best work. And that's what we see in our research creates the most positive impact on the resident, at least. So I'm pro hybrid. What about you, Katie?
I think I'm pro hybrid. I might lean a little bit more towards the human side if there's a scale, because I do really think that that's what makes an impact. And I'm also pro using technology to improve the lives of the people on site and of the people who are communicating with residents, like using and setting those expectations. Do I think a chatbot being on 24/7 is good for anybody? No. And if you're setting the expectation that if someone reaches out and they're going to get an instant answer within 2 minutes because there's all of these open lines of communication and the people can't, and you can't handle it, that's just a bad experience all around for everybody. So I think there's ways to maybe shut off some lines of communication and funnel people into the right place to make it easier on the resident but also the people who are trying to execute day to day. So I
agree. I think it comes down to the consumer too, because a lot of consumers right now really prefer to do as much as they can on self-serve with automated systems before they need a human being. But when we need a human being, there is nothing more frustrating than multiple phone prompts that never lead you to a human being, or points on a website where you can never, ever find a contact form that actually gets you to a human being, or wondering if there even is a human being behind this business. So I think it comes down to that too. And ultimately, it just comes down to how well you bridge the tech and human handoff.
So where did the name Cadence come from? What's the story behind your business?
I'd love to tell you that. Cadence comes from just running. I've always been a runner. And Cadence felt like a really good name for a business because I always felt like there are a lot of parallels between running and business when it comes to optimal pace or training or just the tiny little changes you can make that change your performance completely. So I named the company Cadence, and we really try to focus on running themes throughout the business. So we're really about pacing strategies. We come into every conversation with clients on, do you have enough bandwidth across your organization to hit the ground running on the priorities that are in front of you, or do you need to change the pace or add more runners? Which is it going to be? And the audits, the diagnostic audits that we run are called the stride and the sprint. So we tease it in with either you're making strides or taking strides. Ultimately, you really want optimal performance. And the sprints really are all about, it's a sprint to get to a marathon, and being able to run at optimal speed when you're onboarding a new property or acquiring, or you've got a stall out in performance on one. It's hopefully a stage of just sprinting to a finish line to get back on track and stabilize. So a lot of what we do comes from a theme of running, but you definitely don't have to be a runner to participate with us.
You'll appreciate this. I think of Katie's LinkedIn strategy as base building. This is like her zone 2 training leading up to next year. I don't know if you would like that analogy, Katie, but that's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
Jake's got me in my heart rate target zones here, and I don't even know it.
I think there are so many parallels between business operations and work-life balance and athletic performance. I tend to have always been in some level of athletics. Running was always a thing for me when you can get up and run anywhere. You don't have to have a gym right nearby if you're traveling a lot. Mm-hmm. But in the last 8 years, I took up women's hockey. And that was humbling, extremely humbling. So you take your comfort zone of running and throw yourself on skates on a rink with a puck and a stick and other players coming at you. And it's a whole different mentality of being coached and training and learning to lean on team members and on your team rather than your own individual performance. So I just tend to operate from a standpoint of throw yourself outside your comfort zone every once in a while and lean into opportunities to grow and learn from other people or from your own experience or from just being really uncomfortable for a little bit.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Janet, thank you for joining us on Feedback Fatigue. We appreciate it today. It's good to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Thank you so much for the invite.